Hi everyone, this is Sarah, and I'm just doing the little recording on our group's presentation. Should Apple be forced to assist the government's efforts to crack cell phones needed for criminal investigations? Jumping right into it, a little bit of an introduction. Apple encryption was created in September 2014 in an iOS update. It was called data protection, and it basically just used a hardware that encrypted the device to protect user data. What sparked the whole issue of whether or not Apple should help the government in criminal cases was the San Bernardino terrorist attack. This happened in December of 2015. It was a major event that turned Apple and the FBI against each other. There were two individuals that participated in this mass shooting. They killed 14 people and injured 22 others. One of the shooters left his phone behind. The FBI found it and wanted to get into it to get more evidence. And the FBI asked Apple if Apple would unlock the phone, and Apple said no because of their user privacy policy. And the FBI took the claim to court, and eventually the FBI just found a way to unlock the iPhone without Apple. They do it through a third-party company that we'll talk about a little bit later, and they dropped the legal battle. So there's no official ruling on this exact instance, but there's still tension today on whether or not the FBI should have been able to access encrypted data on Apple products. Another situation where this issue came to light was in the Pensacola shooting. So a shooter killed 3 individuals in Florida, and then he shot one of his 2 iPhones and then killed himself. So this was very suspicious activity. Many people wondered why he would feel the need to shoot his iPhone. There obviously must have been something on there that was evidence if there's someone else involved, or if something a larger organization was behind the attack. No one knew, but the iPhone would have been a good place to start, especially considering the fact that he shot it before he killed himself. So the FBI obviously wanted access to both of these phones, and Apple handed over data that they felt was necessary with both devices, but William Barr, the U.S. Attorney General, stated that they didn't give what was necessary for unlocking the devices. And eventually the FBI reconstructed the broken phone, gained access to the phone through a third-party resource, but that's a super high-cost resource, and it takes a lot of extra time. So FBI uses third-party resources such as Cellbrite. There's another one called Grayshift, and they unlock phones when necessary. So in Utah, to use this resource, it's $5,000 per officer, and the system that runs it is $25,000 a year. So it's pretty expensive, and those are all taxpayer dollars that are going to pay for that, and it's very timely. Some previous court rulings, these are not the exact situation, but similar. Riley v. California. In 2014, David Leon Riley was pulled over due to an expired registration via license plate. He was arrested because of possession of weapons upon search. And the detective searched David, and he wanted to search his phone as well. Riley fought this in court that his Fourth Amendment rights were violated. But the Supreme Court unanimously came to the conclusion that officers may search phones with a warrant. So since the war of Apple versus FBI, the Supreme Court hasn't updated their rulings. This is probably the most recent Supreme Court ruling that we've seen. Government officials tend to use a third-party company, we already talked about that, when necessary, instead of dealing with Apple. But using Apple would save a lot of time and money. Some other laws that have been passed previously that could be applicable to this situation is the All Writs Act. There was an article written that basically stated that the government says it has found a way for Apple to help make such data retrieval possible, and is demanding that it do so under a 1789 law, the All Writs Act. It's a catch-all authority for federal courts to enforce their wishes. A 1977 Supreme Court ruling in the United States versus New York Telephone found that the All Writs Act required a telephone company to install a device that kept track of calls made and received. Quote, citizens have a duty to assist in enforcement of the laws, the court said. To be specific, the All Writs Act specifically states that courts may issue all writs necessary or appropriate in aid of their respective jurisdictions and agreeable to the usages and principles of law. So this applies in this situation. It's not the exact same, obviously. In the 1977 court ruling with the New York Telephone Company, it's not the same, but it's applicable in the sense that the U.S. government has passed a law saying that telephone companies have to keep track of calls and related information. So this begs the question, why would the U.S. government pass this law with no intention of actually accessing this data, especially in cases like the 2014 mass shooting or the 2016 terrorist attack? What's the point, kind of storing this information if the U.S. government doesn't get access to it to make the United States a safer place? Talking about why Apple should assist the government, it's important to note that Apple already does. According to a biannual transparency report that Apple released in the summer of 2020, Apple stated that it had received 3,619 account requests from the U.S. government in the beginning half of 2019, and Apple also stated that it gave at least some information on 90% of these cases. This is notable because some of the media has portrayed, it's been portrayed to me at least when I watch the news, that Apple just refuses to give any data to the government, but it's almost the opposite. Apple gives kind of a lot of information to the government, and so the line has kind of shifted. It's not if Apple should give information to the government, but how much they should give. And so we've already kind of established that Apple is assisting the government in some ways. So it's not anymore an argument over all privacy or all security, because we've already compromised that line a little bit, if that makes sense. So now it's where do we draw the line on privacy rights instead of should we. So why then should Apple join in the government's efforts to crack cell phones needed for criminal investigations? The most notable or public instance was where the government specifically requested Apple's help in 2016 when they asked Apple to unlock 2 iPhones belonging to a terrorist named Mohammed al-Shamrani. We kind of talked about this a little bit earlier. They gave lots of gigabytes of information to the government, but they wouldn't completely unlock the iPhones. William Barr, we said this earlier, claimed that Apple did not do enough in helping find that evidence. And what ultimately ended up happening, the FBI paid the third-party Cellbrite $1 million to unlock the iPhones, which got the FBI the evidence they needed to convict Mohammed al-Shamrani. These third-party companies, Grayshift and Cellbrite, they're in direct competition with big tech companies, and they're continually trying to find ways to undermine the Apple security protection and decrypt cell phones. They're extremely costly and take a relatively long time to get information to the government. So there's lots of downsides to these third-party companies. The biggest two, obviously, are they are super, super costly, and they're super time-consuming. And Apple could give the information to the government in a single day, but refuses to, and then the government has to use taxpayer dollars that could be going to helping other parts of the country. They have to use those taxpayer dollars to unlock phones, which is something Apple could do in a day. So there are downsides to Apple sharing information with the government. I think it's important to note. Giving information to the government could be considered an invasion of privacy. It's something that privacy is something that's super important to all individuals. It's what makes us kind of who we are. However, most people don't realize that the government is going to end up with the exact information that they want to convict subjects, regardless of if Apple helps or not. In every situation where this has been brought to the news, the government ends up getting this information. The only difference is the government has to spend way more money and way more time trying to get the information than if Apple would just help. So that's kind of the downside here, is not should there be privacy in the US, because the government ends up with this information anyways, and Apple could help and be way more efficient but refuses to. So why is the net impact of Apple giving information to the government positive, or why do the pros outweigh the cons? There are major privacy concerns. We talked about that just barely. But like we said, Apple giving information to the government the pros far outweigh the cons, because we could use the money that we spend, the U.S. government could use the money that they spend unlocking these iPhones, millions of dollars a year, on improving school systems in the United States, improving roads, increasing wages, stuff like that that would help society in other aspects. And Apple could give information, and we could convict terrorists and mass shooters quicker, and we could improve the lives of the average U.S. citizen by allowing Apple to give information to the government. What have some experts said? The Attorney General William Barr says that Apple's decision has dangerous consequences for public safety and national security. Government attorneys argue that a larger threat is overrated, stating that the software never has to come into the custody of the government. No one would even have access to it unless Apple chose to share it. So it's not like if Apple opens this door to privacy that the floodgates just open. No, it's only when the government requests it from Apple in certain criminal cases when they're trying to convict terrorists. So it's not kind of once it's open, now our data is just free everywhere. It's more of a only in specific instances when it's used to increase the security of the United States and the safety of the American citizen. President Barack Obama said that an absolutist view on encryption is fetishizing our phones above every other value. Former FBI Director James Comey indicated that without a backdoor, many criminals won't be convicted. The U.S. Attorney commented that Apple retains the technical ability to comply, and its refusal to comply with the court's order, despite the technical feasibility of doing so, instead appears to be based on its concern for its business model and public brand marketing strategy. So this is no longer just about privacy or not. It's more of a brand marketing strategy. It's more of putting their brand out there and trying to attract more customers. It's more about money making for Apple, which is a little bit gray on that ethics side, because you're wondering if Apple just gives information to the government can use the money that they save to improve the lives of others, where Apple's looking to earn more money to improve their own company. Some evidence, as of June 2023, 58% of Americans, or over 100 million people, use the Apple iPhone. The U.S. has the highest market share of iPhones. This is why cracking cell phones is not an invasion of privacy. The Fourth Amendment protects citizens from unreasonable searches. In a case where probable cause has been established, a warrant must be obtained to proceed with the search. So, probable cause is something that's important to define because it comes into play big time here. So, probable cause exists when the facts and circumstances and reasonably trustworthy information are sufficient in themselves to warrant a man of reasonable caution in the belief that an offense has been or is being committed. In effect, more evidence must exist than not that an individual has committed a crime. So, in the case of the shooter that shot his iPhone and then killed himself after he killed multiple people, there's obviously probable cause that he's committed a crime and that there's reason to believe that there's something on that phone that is going to help convict this person or lead to other criminals. Once officials have provided this information, they must go before a judge and get a search warrant approved. Once approved, the police then have authority to seize property, including cell phones. So we saw this in previous court cases. Once you have a search warrant approved, you can search cell phones. So this is kind of, again, the Supreme Court has said that it is lawful and constitutional to search cell phones with a warrant, meaning that if the FBI has a warrant to search these phones, Apple should be able to assist them in finding the information that they need. So in conclusion, Apple should be forced to assist the government's efforts to crack cell phones needed for criminal investigations. Why? The majority of U.S. residents are iPhone users, which means that if a crime is committed, incriminating data and or evidence may likely be found on an iPhone. Apple's assistant will expedite the investigation process by eliminating the use of a third party like Cellbrite or Grayshift. It will ultimately save taxpayers, criminal victims, and their families time and money when dealing with criminal investigations. It's not a violation of the Fourth Amendment right when a warrant is properly obtained. Apple doesn't have to give government backdoor access, assistance would only allow for Apple to maintain control over their technology while still aiding in investigations where necessary and the proper legal channels have been taken. So Apple doesn't have to just give the government access to everything. It's only when the government has access to warrant and has probable cause to search an iPhone that Apple would decrypt an iPhone for the government. Here are some of our sources, and we just want to say thank you for listening, and yeah.